All right, so I see that we do have a couple of attendees that have already managed to log on to our event today. I'm going to give it a couple of minutes. I'm Kathy Muhlahla, and I'm going to be your moderator for this afternoon. Looking forward to having a great conversation, talking empowerment women. We'll be looking also at the kind of role that Sibanye-Stillwater has been playing and how women in this organization have also been supported through their career. So let's say we'll officially kick off the program at about 1:05.
Hello. Are you in a meeting?
All right, I think that now is a good time to get started. We certainly have a lot more of the participants this afternoon that have been able to join us. Of course, this is our new normal. This is what life looks like, right? We get to have conversations like these from the comfort of our offices or the comfort of even our own homes for some of us. But it certainly doesn't mean that life has stopped. Life as we know it has certainly been ended abruptly, but this new normal is certainly taking over our lives. And it's great to see that even during a month like August, when we're marking women, when we're celebrating women in this country, and we're reflecting on the challenges that are affecting women, we're still able to have these conversations. Of course, today's dialogue, the theme for today, is empowering the voice of women in leadership to enable full participation in their roles in leadership and decision making. So this, for me, is the kind of conversation that you're having directed at C-suite executives, but also it gives us room to dream. It gives us room to understand what is possible and what are the things that we can start empowering ourselves with today that will enable us to really be able to climb to the full scope of the corporate ladder, as it were. Mining, as we all know, has not always been a sector that's open to women. It's not always been a sector that women can easily access, but that is changing. And I think Sibanye-Stillwater becomes a good reflection of what can happen when there is intent behind some of the decisions. Of course, when you look at the numbers, 13% of the employees are currently female. That figure in itself might at first be a bit shocking, like only 13%, but then you compare it with global standards and you realize that the company is certainly within range. And I think a conversation like today forces us to look at what more can be done to ensure there's greater diversity, but also to open the door for more women to be able to access the opportunities that lie within the mining sector. So how today is going to run is we'll open the segment and allow our esteemed panelists, who of course are experts in this field. I'm just here to help guide the conversation. They're the true geniuses that you're going to be hearing from today. They're going to be giving us their opening remarks while the conference is underway. We want you to participate in polls that we're going to be running. If you look to the right of your screen, you'll find under the chat group. So chat, you feel free to send any messages. I see some of you have already started. Charmaine has sent a message. I really love what Sibanye-Stillwater always tries to do with regard to empowering women in leadership. That's just one of the messages that's in the chat group right now. So continue to engage on that chat group. If you have any questions, especially questions that you want directed to the panelists, put them on that chat group and I'll be able to see them. Right under the icon for chat, we have polls. So that's where we're running the 3 polls throughout today. So take some time out and vote in those polls. The first question we're asking you today: are mining organizations continuously developing and empowering women to grow and develop into senior leadership roles? As you can see, we've got 3 options: yes, no, and yes, but not enough. So certainly make sure that you go and vote in that poll. Give us your opinion. The second question that we're asking: are there limitations within the mining sector for women to be appointed in senior executive roles? And what do those numbers there look like? Again, we want you to be able to give us your thought and your insight. And I'll keep going and referencing those polls as our conversation gets underway this afternoon. I'm looking forward to it. I certainly hope that you too are looking forward to not just listening, but I think most importantly, engaging with some of the issues and being honest about the challenges that you're facing within the sector, and perhaps learning from each other through this conversation, just in terms of what it is that we can do to make the sector a much safer place, I believe, for women in the industry. That said, let me introduce our panelists for this afternoon. I'll start with Dr. Rika Viljoen. Dr. Rika, please wave your hand to our participants so that they see who you are. There we go. Dr. Rika is a renowned researcher and facilitator specializing in engagement, inclusivity, strategic HR, multinational and organizational culture, and radical organizational transformation. We're going to be hearing plenty from her today. Next is Ms. Deshni Naidu. Deshni, if you can please wave. Thank you so much. Deshni Naidu is a chemical engineer and is a mining executive with diverse experience spanning 22 years. You need to tell us how you do it, Desh. And of course, we've got Mr. Vusi Vilakati. Vusi, we can't see you right now. We're having a bit of a challenge with the connection to Vusi's line, but maybe you can.
I'm waving though.
That's great. We just can't see it yet. We can hear you loud and clear. So we'll certainly hope that there's nothing wrong that goes with the connection. So we'll just keep watching your connection, Vusi, and bear in mind that there might be some challenges there. With that said, let me then just begin by introducing Dr. Viljoen. If you can kick us off with the opening remarks for this afternoon. Dr. Viljoen, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. I can't hear you. I think that there is a button there that needs to be pressed. Let's try again. No, I still cannot hear you. So we're going to try and see what exactly the issue might be. Let me see. It's all clear on my side. It's all clear on my side, but I'm sure the guys are also working on it in the background. This is the joy of having virtual conferences, right? We get to play around with those buttons until they work. So we'll hear exactly what it is that what the technicians tell us. Deshni, please say hello. I want to make sure I can hear you.
Yeah. Kathy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Vusi, welcome back online. Vusi, can you hear me? Hi, Vusi.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Dr. Philyun, let me try.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Dr. Philyun, let me try again. Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm still having difficulty with your sound. This is what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to try and reconnect to the conversation. While we do that, however, though, let me perhaps give Deshni an opportunity to give her opening remarks so we don't keep our delegates waiting. Deshni?
Yeah. So thank you so much, Kathy. And this is what I love about women. We know how to make a plan. So Kathy, let me start off by something that you touched on. I mean, the South African mining industry is a 150-year plus industry. You know, we lifted the ban on women working underground in mines in 1996 only. The 2002 Mining Charter 1 target of 10%, across the industry was a very steep challenge in the recently opened industry in post-apartheid South Africa then. 10% was only achieved in 2013. So today, 7 years later, we are only at 12%. Progress can be largely attested to regulatory pressure and not so much from the authentic leadership that this industry needed. So although there are pockets of good practice, and Sibanye-Stillwater definitely one of those companies, I think the progress that has been made has been mostly in support roles, something that's playing very nicely into the phenomenon that we now call glass walls versus glass ceilings. So we simply have not, for the last 20 plus years, done enough to transform this industry of ours. I'm a South African. I've had a very atypical career path in the industry. I am a chemical engineer. I went into corporate finance. I became CFO of an Anglo-American division, and then CEO of Vedanta Resources, the Zinc International division, before my 38th birthday. So what worked for me? Mentors worked, career choice, boldness, differentiation worked as well. But there are many things that worked, against me. Continuously and mostly unnecessarily having to prove myself. Continuous exclusion, defending my seat at every table that I took. But I stayed resilient and I pushed, knowing that my success will assist pave the way for others ultimately. And I wanted to get into a leadership position to drive transformation from the front, so that I can be part of mitigating and eliminating the many barriers that I faced and I still continue to face today. So we've seen numerous studies, Kathy, from Harvard Business Review to the McKinsey Insights to the United Nations, that show that diverse companies with diverse leadership teams deliver better bottom line results. We've recently seen that female-led countries manage the COVID-19 pandemic far better than their male counterparts. And we know in South Africa, that the multiplier effect of money in the hands of women in society is far more reaching than with the men in society. We also know today that South African mining industry, is in structural decline. I can say that maybe exclusion is definitely a contributing factor there, and will be further impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, both from a health point of view, as well as the economic obliteration we are currently experiencing. So no doubt the industry, as with the country, is dealing with a multitude of issues here, relating to legacy, societal, physical, institutionalized, culture or DNA in the industry, and not to mention leadership gaps. Gender diversity, to which I believe we have a moral obligation to address, is an obvious lever to better support the industry. The voice of women in leadership is being drowned today but the voices of the
I'm
two
back.
male counterparts.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Vusi. Just hang 10. We'll get to you in a moment.
I'm back. Thank you.
Okay, great.
So I just want to say,
Go ahead,
in
Deshni.
closing on my opening remarks, the voice of women in
Can you
leadership
hear me?
today.
Hi, Vusi. We can
Yes,
hear.
I can hear you.
We can
Okay,
hear.
wonderful.
We can hear you loud and clear. I think there's still a bit of a delay in your connection, and Deshni is just giving her opening statement.
I heard part of it. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
So I think just to close off, I wanted to say that the voice of women in leadership today is being drowned by the voices of their too many male counterparts. Men need to be brought on board or need to bring themselves on board. Women need to finally take empowerment so that the industry can accelerate the necessary and value-adding business imperative of gender diversity and inclusion. Thank you, Kathy.
Deshni, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
that powerful opening statement, and I think really setting a context in terms of what kind of landscape you're working in and the things that you personally have had to navigate through over the years. Dr. Viljoen, I trust that your line is back up online, and so the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I do hope that you can hear me.
Yes, all good.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Deshni, for taking the floor and stepping in. I would like to then start my address this afternoon by thanking everybody that's on the line too, and everybody that's here. The topic is extremely close to my heart. The topic of voices that's not always heard, the topic of inclusion, inclusivity, the topic of diversity of thought. And then in my practice over years, from organizational psychological perspective, in my academic work, my doctorate was on inclusivity and in emerging economies, as actually positioned as a radical strategic transformational methodology of unleashing voice on different levels. And then as a researcher and a scholar, and now recently as the Senior Vice President of Sibanye-Stillwater for Organizational Development, I'm really preoccupied with how can we hear, and in some cases minority groups, in other cases oral history or stories, and how can we listen almost with ears closed, with eyes and hearts and souls to those parts of systems that's not heard because of power dynamics. So I'm interested in the biopsychosocial construct of gender identity. And if you apply some lenses to it, like multiculturalism and or spiral dynamics and or question of existence theory, existential theory, we do know that in a country like South Africa, in about 99% of thinking structures, gender inequality is being presented. So the role that the female plays in the construction of the construct of gender often is in a position of less power. And then my preoccupation with it is how to balance that power back, that all the voices can be heard. So panels like today and conversations like today that is on the cutting edge of the phenomena of diversity and inclusion really sits very close to my heart. And I'm so thankful that we can have this exploration together today.
Fantastic. Vusi, maybe let me give you the floor and an opportunity to give us your opening remarks.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, friends, for the opportunity, and good afternoon, everyone out there. I am here just on the basis of inclusion. They had to include a man somewhere in this conversation. But I'm Vusi Vilagati. My main occupation is a priest, but I've done research also in leadership and African leadership in particular. That would include women as an important part of the conversations I have. Mainly, my being here today is that I lead dialogues and conversations around positionality, what does it mean to understand where you stand in the context of the big scheme of things? So that would mean that what are the historical, current, and trends that shape the stories and narratives of women in society? What does that mean for organizations? How do we begin to liberate voices and allow voices to emerge? If you take by the stats that we have before us, you would inadvertently realize that there's more men in the boardrooms of this country and across the world. What does it mean for the few women that make it to those boardrooms? What happens to their voices? Are they drowned out or are they taken seriously? So that is, for me, the quest for this. So today I'm here to think around that. Secondly, I think for me, the issue of women in leadership is that it is an issue more than just inclusion. It is about understanding when we begin to engage that conversation, where do we stand as men and women? Do we as men come into that conversation to patronize the women into the roles that we want them to occupy, or are we authentic partners in the conversation? So I guess that would do for an introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vusi. I'm going to come back to you, Dr. Rika, because, you know, when we talk about empowerment, it suggests that the person that is being empowered is in a lesser position, that they're in a more vulnerable position. So theirs is to receive and not necessarily to give. Why do women need to be empowered, especially within a sector like the mining sector?
Yeah. So you speak to a dynamic that I also found interesting and that described the power dynamic, in my view, extremely clear. To who must we give power? Who must be empowered? As a matter of fact, explain the dynamic. And I guess it has to do with inclusion and diversity of thought and the positionality and identity as we sort of position that we hold, or then the object psychology. So if you see me, what you encounter disregarding my thinking structure is Afrikaans white female of my age. And that's what I present. Whether I philosophically, ontologically, or epistemologically agree with that or not, that's being presented, portrayed on me. And then psychologically, at least, a dynamic is being created of me in relation to. I must work then against that perception or stereotype to have a voice in that system. So, in an organization like ours, that I guess have done reasonably well, we are 13% currently, more or less, from a women representation perspective. Active strategies are here to try and unleash voice and create places of inclusion and explore diversity of thought. Our CEO, Neil Vroneman, is a patron of the Minerals Council's STREAM initiative to promote women in mining, and he drives it personally in Sibanye-Stillwater. So there's mandate from the top. My question is then, how can we embody that mandate in a way that bring, and let me go there a little, femininity and males and females to the table, because I guess, in my view, it's not only gender specific, it also has to do with energy, and it has to do with voice, and it has to do with soul and spirit. And spirited or soulful conversations are not always seen worthy in spaces that is production orientated and as masculine. From an energy perspective, as mining is a very masculine environment. So I guess the impact can be that both males and females need to do almost what Stella Nkomo and Lisa Boyson spoke to, that managing is male, and that is almost a stereotype that needs to be consciously tackled in this industry, not more so than other industries of this nature. I would like to end off this part of the conversation by just saying that I think we should do human better. So active, conscious exploration of how to take away those boundaries that make people less of who they are, or erode voice, should really be considered organizationally.
these are such important issues that you're talking about, because when one thinks of mining, the immediate image that comes to mind sometimes is the image of miners going underground with their spades and shovels in hand, and that in itself is quite a masculine posture to associate with the industry. So when you are talking about creating room for there to be more femininity, even in how the industry expresses itself, which are the areas? How would that even begin to happen? How can we begin to reimagine the space outside of what it is currently?
Deshni can also support me here with her view. She grew up in this industry. What I can say is I found extremely interesting studies that counter stereotypes, for example, on physical strength. There's been a lot of studies that have proven that females arguably can be as strong physically as males, and therefore maybe that's not the barrier that we perceivingly place on why people cannot enter specific spaces. There is traditional thoughts of what fields of study serve women and not women, and the typical STEM or core mining activities are often seen as not for women. Why I love this industry so much, Kathy, is arguably because the metaphor for me of going underground and get gold sits in Jungian psychology, in female psychology, of going to the depths of soul to go and find the pieces that will come up after pressure and darkness with either gold, which is meaningful, or then not that gold, destroyed, damaged. And for me, the metaphorical symbolism of mining is actually quite powerful in this conversation. It's not an easy work for gender diversity, though, and inclusion. And we have a lot of work to do. But I do feel quite positive towards at least the intent to do the work and to shift some of those assumptions, takes options away from people. I would like to ask if Deshni can also explore. She came up in this mining industry and might have some real opinions about this as well.
Sure. So thank you for that, Rika. And I think just touching on what Rika said, Kathy, if you look at where we've come from, although we've been at this journey for over 20 years, we're still quite infant in the journey in terms of numbers, etc. So you started off by asking Rika, why, this empowerment thing, why does it need to be given? Why is it further entrenched? And I think it's only because we're still at the starting point of this journey that for now, empowerment needs to be given. But I think the reciprocal of that is that women must be made ready through voice, through training, such that they are empowered to take what they've been given to run with it. I think that's important. If I look at, around stereotypes, nature of work, etc., there's so many things that have to come together to properly open up this industry, to make sure that both men and women can thrive in this industry. It starts off with physical environment. We spoke about the image that conjures up when you think about mining in terms of miners, miner lamps, getting to go underground and mine. But we've not, as an industry, spent too much of time redesigning the work that needs to happen underground and on the surface to make sure that a woman, and let's be proud of the fact that women do have different. Industry must cater as much for our similarities as they do for our differences, such that the environment and work processes can be adapted better. Similarly, because our physiques are different, and I'm proud of it, right? Back to Rika's point, we're going to be proud of the fact that we are feminine and that we're going to contribute what we're good at towards this industry. That PPE, protective clothing, is still not standardized to make sure that women feel safe, comfortable when she is underground or on surface to work. So those are some of the basics that need to be addressed. But what's happening right now, through conversations like this, through what we're doing to the Mineral Council, through what Sibanye-Stillwater is doing, I think it's finally the external pressures the internal bottom-up pressures are now suddenly becoming, insurmountable for executives to ignore, to try and push this on a back burner. What's happening right now, and we must keep this momentum, the conversations are becoming real, and now is the time to accelerate this slow burn, kind of 12, 13% in the industry, to an accelerated target. And the last thing there, Kathy, when people think gender balance and gender equality in mining, it's almost unfathomable that we'll ever get there, right?
Yeah.
We're not. Yeah, it's what society looks like. Why can't mining look like what society out there looks like? So the mining charter today calls for targets over 20 to 25%. So there is absolutely no reason why, with the right support, and it starts with leadership commitment, which Sibanye does have, is why we can't get it accelerated to double that in a very short period of time. It takes will from leadership commitment right now.
Sure. Vusi, I'm going to bring you in a moment just to talk about the issue of voice, but perhaps I want to take it back to Deshni. There was something that Rika mentioned around the masculinity of the environment and the extent to which that in itself when many women encounter it, may see it as intimidating. And how do you begin to let your voice flow in a space like that where you don't feel accommodated? How did somebody like you do it? Because how you've risen through the ranks and what you've managed to accomplish says that there are a lot of things that you have managed to get right. And what do you look at and point to as the reason for that?
I think it's easy today, upon reflection and hindsight, to say I got it right. I think what's key to note is that, I got the net right. There were a lot going for me and a lot going against me, but I somehow navigated to get the net right. So, Kathy, I think I started off in 1994. I finished matric in 1994. I started my career in 1998. There was something about it, and I think we must always combine the conversation about post-apartheid South Africa and the journey that I happened to follow. So women were being given, and HDSAs were being given slightly more opportunities. So I'm a professional. I came into this industry where HDSAs did matter. Companies needed to close the gap faster. It was a combination of being a professional and not being afraid to lean in, because I think that's something, and we don't want to stereotype too much here, but women do not lean in as much as they should. I was very bold to pick up my hand for every opportunity and say I would do it. Okay, but I did face discrimination. I did face exclusion. I think when I was junior, you just learn to navigate through your environment. It was very sad because I didn't have as much support around me back then. I mean, now the industry looks a little bit more representative, but back then you didn't really have the support. Kathy, it came down to having boundaries. I made my boundaries very clear in terms of what I will and will not do. I kept things very professional. I learned how to navigate in the man's world, making a man look like he took the decision at some point, and maybe I did. So you become very smart at strategy and tactics. But what I did do very smartly is the minute I got into positions where I could influence, I did it. So I was tactical up to a point. I was very clear on my boundaries. I used my smartness to make a man believe that he was actually the one proposing, good ideas, etc. But I always did it being true to myself, knowing that the cause that I'm going after is ultimately getting into a position where, together with the support around me, I could start to fix this. I do love the industry. I believe there's just so much of good work that we do, that we need to do. But I decided that I would be a pioneer and continue to push what was a very uncomfortable topic back then.
Vusi, how do we begin to amplify women's voices, especially, as Deshni said in her opening remarks, in an environment where there's so many male voices that are drowning out the voices of women?
I think there is a number of things. One, let me start with just what we've done now in the last few minutes. We've asked Deshni to tell her story of how she has walked through the loops of the industry for the last 20 years. So the first place in emboldening the voices of women in this conversation, it is to hear the stories of the women themselves and allow those narratives to shape us. So when I say voice, that means for me that when Vusi speaks, he is Black, he's a man, he is in his mid-40s, and that all of that comes, he was born in a particular time in the history of this country. And so as Deshni speaks, she says, I came into my space around post-apartheid. That has a marker, it's a marker of of great significance in its own. So what this means for me is the very first premise. It is to start with the narratives of women. Allow those narratives to flourish. Allow those narratives to be publicized. Allow those narratives to become dominant. One of the issues, which is often for me the issue in August, it's the fact that we often don't look enough at the places and the stories of success and resilience and conquering. We sometimes look at how much we haven't reached, and yet there are stories that are unfolding of people that are making it and changing there. That's the first place. The second level of this for me is that we have to do the structural changes, because the issue about women in the public space and in mining and in particular those sectors, it's the fact that not many children out there, when you say to them, what career are you going into, would immediately raise their hand and say, I want to go into mining. But if they see more models of what this might look like, then we need to do that. So we need to read the policies that government has put around each of these sectors, and mining in particular. Then you can then say, this is what government has. These are the opportunities that are availing themselves, and begin to translate that into offers and spaces for structural change in organizations. Because when you do that, you're beginning to create space for not only in terms of allowing voices of individuals, but you're creating the architecture in the space in an organizational setup to make these voices audible.
And Dr. Rika, when you look at something as important as Vusi is highlighting, being able to give women the platform to tell their stories, how can that be done in a way that, because often when women talk about their experiences, it is reduced to being, oh, you are so weak, get over it, that's life. And it belittles the very real challenges and the very real structural hindrances that get in people's way from being able to fully achieve their true potential.
Yes, indeed. So I have two answers to that. And I want to go the hard route, and then I would like to tackle the storytelling route with Vusi's and your own comment. So the hard route, the hard facts of the matter is, I actually guess it's almost violent to women sometimes. So gender-based violence as a phenomena for me extends to, oh, you are flowers. Good day, flowers, bloomikies. Good day, like this. Oh, and I did it to you, probably saying I enjoy the color purple. It's that compliments that go to females that just sometimes shift their power dynamic, and it comes from a good place. It's not necessarily that I judge the place of where it starts, but the dynamic that's being created is the one place, the other one in a power dynamic, and that one is up to that, or waiting for the women to take notes in a meeting, and or asking, hey, I'm thirsty, can you get it for us? It's slight. It can be more violent, it can be touching, it can be other things as well. Taking that argument, it's also the assumptions around gender identity that's deeply held in society. I once was told by, it's not South African, it was in Mali, by the head of the union, they called me Jeneba, which means princess of the nation. So they called me Jeneba, for a woman you speak sense. By implication, it is males would have belong here, you actually don't, you know. So it's some of those things. In that there, for me, was the assumption also, if I want to work here, I need to understand the power dynamics of this nation. And how should I navigate to be able to be accepted there? But to your story about voice and people having voice and whether we allow stories to be much more. But one of the reasons why I joined Sibanye-Stillwater is of a story that I told of one of our mine overseers in one of our areas, and it's in the old Marikana area, where she was, it's published today in a book on courageous leadership. It's an international book. It's utilized at universities internationally on leadership and how to frame things. That was violently attacked during the Marikana incident, and how she frames that story as an individual story of hope is that the attack wasn't towards her, the country was crying. And today she's managing the very same men that have attacked her in that situation as the leader of that area in a very healthy, functional way because of the framing of it, or her emotional intelligence, way in which she constructs that story. Her story has been written up and told. So we do, from Sibanye-Stillwater perspective, try and make as much options available for people to share stories, to relate with stories. And to Vusi's point, stories have meaning. And if I can find you in your story, the relational ability, the magic, the Velcro that make us connect with each other, not because of our diversity factors, but as humans, really bring a connectedness into that space, a realness that I believe has healing potential. So I believe in stories and storytelling. I would like to just close this part of my conversation by saying I learned more about women in mining in Zimbabwe from males. That's male advocates learn from females in this month of people that really care.
Sure. Dr. Fagin, I'm going to ask you if maybe you can also move a bit closer to your device as the sound keeps getting a bit lower. But just a reminder to everybody that's tuned in to this conversation, the hashtag to use for today is SS Women in Mining, or the hashtag Sibanye-Stillwater. Of course, I'll also be able to pick up a lot of the questions that you want to send to us on those two particular hashtags. On the chat group, I'm opening the floor up to all of you to ask questions to our panelists. Feel free to direct a question to a particular panelist. Otherwise, I will open it to the floor. Also, a reminder of the polls that we're running this afternoon. So the one that I'm seeing right now, are there still limitations within the mining sector for women to be appointed in senior executive roles? And the majority of you, they're saying yes, 72% so far. All right, the number just shifted as more people come in to vote. So do take some time out as we're having this conversation to cast your vote on the multiple polls that we are running. I'm sure it's going to come in as very useful data. Given the fact that so many people don't, Deshni, the fact that people don't see that enough opportunities are being created for women in executive roles, does it make women in the free suites in the mining sector an anomaly?
Yeah. So there's a reason for why those positions aren't being created, right? I spoke about something called glass walls. What I was speaking there about, we might be 13% representative, 12% representative across the industry today. But actually, if you look at the numbers, women in support functions like your HR, finance, admin, etc., can go as much as 50, 60% of those disciplines. So we've created a bit of a monster here where we've, in the quest for getting numbers to look right for regulatory compliance in the first instance, we've actually deferred to getting to attracting more women in those enabling and supporting functions, right? But if you look at core mining, core mining is all about understanding the technical, the operational side of this industry, right? If you're going to appoint a C-suite in a core position, he or she has to come through the conventional core route. So we might look like we're creating a pipeline of females for the C-suite, but we've created a monster in what we are doing on the supporting functions that we don't now create the pipeline. That's number one. Number two, for as long as you have men in decision-making positions, largely boards, investors, which I know the sentiment is changing, and I'm really broad brush stroking here. So nothing meant to people that are authentically doing what they are supposed to. But if you still look at what investor contingent looks like, board contingent looks like, exco contingent looks like, Kathy, the pyramid is getting quite narrow. How is that woman going to get the opportunity to go into the 1 to 2 roles that exist? Okay? So it's a combination. It is in fact a combination. What I'm calling for, in what I said in my opening remarks, and what I'm quite a passionate advocate for, is if we want to truly get this right, and if our male counterparts want to finally get on board, because we need both men and women to make this happen, we need for men in C-suite roles to step aside. We need for women to be given the opportunity to replace them, right? So I often get told, Kathy, oh, but she's not ready, and what's going to happen when she fails? And I say, so what? We'll support her. We'll support her. And who is holding this industry to account for the number of men that have failed in their positions? So why are we so scared to give women the chance that they've been working towards now? So the role modeling can't stop up to a point. We need to see more senior executive women in boardrooms, in exco committees, so that the supposed commitment that this industry claims to have is no longer lip service, but is seen through concrete actions. Can the men please step aside and let the women get into these C-suite positions?
That is an incredible call, Deshni, and certainly one that I don't see many men raising their hands to do, even those who are supporters of the transformation of the industry. And Vusi, in many respects, it takes radical decisions in order to fundamentally change the structure of anything. You have to take drastic steps sometimes if indeed you are true and committed to the work of transformation.
I take two routes to this. There are places where we need to do what Deshni is calling, that we ask some men to pause a bit to allow women to move ahead. I think there are places for that. There are places where we need to create spaces for both people to flourish, and so that we can see what the power of having men and women, an integrated space, look like. But there are places where when women have to be brought on board, you hear the conversations starting about, are they competent enough? Have they enough experience? Have they had enough exposure? You can't find exposure. You can't buy exposure from a grocery shop, by the way. So in all respects, when you then saying they haven't had exposure, it's almost like the same conversation about race. When you have an issue about race, or you have an issue about gender equality and equity in the workplace, there are times when you need to do the head count and say, how do we create the suitable pipeline for this to happen? And in some cases, creating the pipeline does mean you have to say to some men, would you mind if we allow this to happen? We are strategic, we are sincere, and we mean change in this department and in this area. I think there's space for that. But there's also space for helping and making spaces for both men to flourish. Particularly for those that have been in leadership more, men are called to probably mentor and sponsor and become advocates for women to go ahead. So in an organization, my role, if I'm in Sibanye, then I would say my role would be that as a man, I would then create spaces and recognize the women that are making it through and create the avenues for them for their voices and for their skills to flourish. And when they don't have exposure, it is our role to expose them from today or going onwards.
And I suppose being comfortable enough to say that I will lift you up on my shoulders. Dr. Rika, do you want to speak to that point? How that change can begin to come in, and I wonder where what Deshni was saying earlier, the role that leaning in plays in being able to then get the exposure and able to being to having your framework opened up to different types of possibilities.
Yeah, I guess my answer is exploration on different levels of the phenomena that we are speaking of. That's quite similar for me to the Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter type of debate that we also refer to, is how do you position this? Because it's so important. And if one house is burning down, must we say all houses are important, or can we then focus on that one house that's in trouble? It's almost this. So it's a tough debate, and often you can only tackle it structurally, like in real strategically, with all the types of the building blocks and the pieces that can lead to sustainable transformation. Because the side effect of this is quite patronizing, that I'm being promoted because I'm female and I'm not worthy anyway. And then we just perpetuate the cycle of the power dynamic anyway, and we set up people for failure in systems. So a systemic integration thereof, or systemic intervention thereof, is really to try and intervene on all the different domains of social systems theory. So it's first on individual level, how an individual can, with help, with leadership development, how can I have voice? Do I know who I am? Do I know what drives me? What's my questions of existence? How can I be me? Can I be me? Do I know what me means? And if I speak about identity, is identity defined in self or in the collective? Am I my tribe? Who am I if I'm not my tribe? And what do I present? That's one lens of that. Can I speak? A second lens is then on the team dynamic. In my team, do I allow for differences? And how do I allow for differences? And must we all be similar? And can we disagree? And what's happening in the team domain if we do disagree? Is there violence, rejection? So we act similarly just to fit in. And I'm actually speaking male and female and all minority groups here if one look at the phenomena of inclusivity. It then goes to the organizational structuring and how we wire the DNA for inclusion, exclusion, and for power. How do we, in psychology, there's two terms. There's valency and vicissitude. And valency is the use of power in power relations towards each other. And vicissitude has to do with change that's not that easy. And both of those aspects should actually be really looked at from a systemic wiring position. If I make it very practical, how do we construct a culture of inclusivity in Sibanye-Stillwater and then industry where people can bring who they are to the organizational table so that we are not psychotic in what we do and what we say. So we can say we are open to diversity, but our actions can be totally contradictory to that. So how are the practices or the wiring congruent with strategic intent? And then, of course, where I started off, society in South Africa specifically has a specific social identity construct. And I have a lot of executive friends, and my academic field also publish these type of stories where senior executives will actually have two sets of lives. Some of my friends have local traditional wear that they will go and get dressed at the garage before they go home, because the minute that they enter into that space, the role change. And it's also societal. So we are speaking consciousness here, and we are speaking gender consciousness. And back to Vusi's frame, it is identity and positionality of where we find women in and then minorities in spaces and the voice that we assign to them.
All right, I want to now look at some of the questions that our delegates and participants have been sending in to this conversation. Let me begin with Litzikeng here. Litzikeng Motlakwana, who is from Mutubi. The question being asked there, we've seen how different mining affects communities around them. Does Sibanye have a strategy to counter the detrimental effects related to the health status of the community, and women being the most affected and at the receiving end in terms of being overburdened with care work and listing their menial jobs in the process. Does the mine have a strategy to address these issues in their plan?
Yes. So I will answer from a Sibanye-Stillwater perspective, definitely, and probably not enough, but from a social perspective, definitely from an environmental perspective. The philosophy of Sibanye-Stillwater is profound. It is to improve lives. Now, to get that in mining is difficult because, you know, of the type of industry that we are at, as well as the type of operations that we run in societies. We are in the mid-phase of society. But the emphasis on the environment, the emphasis of the consciousness of that mining and how to control the various aspects of it are truly managed as consciously as possible, with all the attempts to comply to the international types of norms that govern or lead mining in not only in South Africa but internationally. So there's a huge attempt to do that. Do we get it practically right on grassroots level where it impacts the individual or the individual community? I'm not always sure. The intent is surely there.
Vusi, do you want to add to that? Maybe we're talking about voice, and I'm thinking here about the voices of communities that are affected by work that is done by the mining sector. Vusi, I seem to have lost your audio. Just double check you've unmuted yourself.
Yes, I've unmuted myself. Sorry, thank you. I often think I use simple levels of analysis when I work with these kinds of things. What are the issues that affect society at large in relation to mining and communities, and those are the issues around society. And the country, in the broader scheme of things relating to mining, there are conversations that continue. In the aftermath of Marikana, there are conversations around what does it mean to be a responsible organization. And I think that is a key conversation for Sibanye as a mine. In my level of engagement with them, that is a key conversation about how do we contribute to the communities around us. The issue of women vulnerability is a national issue. We can make it a pointed issue when it relates to women that are affected within the area of mining, but it is a broad issue related from gender-based violence to the issues of access, to the issues of historical injustices that have taken away more from women than it has done for men. So we need to address that in that broad level. Then when we enter into the organization, then you need to then begin to do the work that people like Rika are doing, to begin to look at the organizational architecture and begin to say, how do the women in this organization feel and experience what it means to be in the workspace? And as you work with those issues, so you're working with the layers of that, and then you move down to the individual systematically, and you can then begin to identify what are the stories, what are the issues, what are the interventions. And I think at each of these levels, there are interventions that are being done to begin to take women seriously. As Rika says, they may not be enough in their measure, but there is initiative and a growing awareness about what these issues might mean for gender transformation. And for me, gender transformation is much broader than just the head count between men and women. It is to begin to deal with the values and the beliefs and the assumptions and the patriarchal tendencies that organizations and society carries. If someone calls you a flower as a woman, can they call me a flower as a man? So all of those kinds of things that might seem silly at one level, but why is it okay for someone to be called a flower and not the other? So the systematic change must be across all the levels of analysis, society, organizations, and individuals, but also deal with the culture that creates and continues to make this a possible reality.
Sure. I'm seeing plenty of engagement in our chat. People are sending through different comments on the conversation that is currently happening. Maybe one or two. Geraldine Mapapa says, good afternoon. Very insightful conversation. And the theme befits what is currently happening in our society today. Refilo Mayona says, great conversation. Transformation is a journey, and we're grateful for opportunities that are given to women on merit at Sibanye-Stillwater. We continuously do our best to occupy space and let our voice be heard and recognized for our performances. I'm going to leave it there with that particular message. One of the questions coming in, Nuntandla Ngwenya asking this question. I see that Sibanye-Stillwater is working hard in empowering women in the workplace. However, in my experience, it's been a rather daunting experience with regard to the red tape when trying to enter the business space. What are they doing to support young and upcoming aspirant miners?
So I can start, and then Deshni may arguably add something from the industry perspective as well. We have different programs to try and enter people in, and deliberately also develop people. I recently have been part of 2 different university studies that study the phenomena, and the one that I can refer to today that's furthest down the line has to do with the Gender Institute of Stellenbosch University that engage with some of our women in terms of the entry into the system at the low level and how to enter in to understand those dynamics. Specialized development plans are in process, and we have, and I need to giggle a little bit here, of our senior executives are taking up coaching roles. And we referred to that earlier, and Lucy spoke to that, is to how males can actually coach. I hope to make it over time even more tangible and more structured, that it doesn't fizzle out, but really purposeful from a coaching perspective. But definitely there are emphasis placed on entering into the system. Hopefully also if our culture transformation change, we try and be future ready, and we try and be value based in our decision makings, and our values are being described as the CARE values. Hopefully that can be felt in active interrelation with our social system, that people on the opposing side, the other side of it, feel cared for in the interrelation.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Rita. Deshni?
Yeah. So I think specifically on Sibanye, most corporates will definitely have access to bursaries, for people that want to train, etc. So I'd really encourage her to go and find out, number one. But if I have to look at, from a broad industry point of view, I championed through the Minerals Council in the last couple of months, and initiative that targeted, the increased representation and advancement of women across the industry. So, Kathy, quite an exciting piece of work, because when Minerals Council South Africa makes a commitment, it is being backed by the power of 30 plus, CEOs as well as C-suite executives who are mining South Africa. So the commitment that those executives made is that we want to see gender balance, gender equality as soon as possible, but to make sure that we held them to account, said that by 2025, which is only 5 years away, that they want to see the industry at 30%. What we developed, very much in keeping with what Rika just mentioned, is initiatives across the board of what we need to do as leadership in South Africa, in terms of top-down commitment, what we need to do to recruit, retain, and then to develop and advance. And what we've created across each of those pillars is what I call the foundational measures, in terms of the basics that need to be put in place so that women feel safe in the industry. Because, from some of the workshops and surveys that we conducted as part of those studies, when Vusi asked the question, if you ask a young woman in a community, would she go into mining, or a young man for that matter, the chances of them saying mining is almost, negligible right now. And the sole reason for that is women and young men alike do not feel this is a safe industry. that this industry is still seen as very much a masculine or a boys' club or a men's club right now. So the initiative that we are driving through the Minerals Council is trying to address some of these stigmas, some of these perception issues, as well as get the industry to at least a level playing field in what some of the foundational measures supporting recruitment, retention, and advancement should be. So I think I can speak. I don't want to speak specifically for Sibanye because I know a little bit outside in, don't know enough about the company inside. But what I can say is that as an industry, we're now seeing, gender diversity very much in the same light as we are seeing zero harm. This is a top priority for the executives now.
And maybe if I can maybe just add one lens to that, which is the international lens, because we also have an international operation in Montana, Stillwater, in Billings in America. There's also initiatives like this going. So it's not only South African, largely South African, but also international initiatives in that specific space. There recently was a program which is called the intern program, to the point of that we have bursaries. In that specific space, there's a target of 30% women that go through the ranks in STEM core mining positions. It's slightly easier because it's not deep underground mining. So it's a different set of conditions where one can really do well. I learned so much about gender diversity from that space that I sometimes think that I, as a South African, hold my own assumptions too, without really knowing it. Things like, I will say in my slang, "Hey guys," which they found abusive. Some of our executives will offer sheets to the females that's older, and they will find, why are you picking on me as a woman, and then age. And so there's other ways of gender that I'm being taught in other systems that we also can bring back. Overall, as an organization, we really look at integral inclusivity and interconnectedness, which then allows for the exploration of how to bring minority groups up and running quickly as possible, or suppress groups, or how can we actively and consciously do things better to readdress power dynamics.
All right. I've got another question here, and actually, this question is directed specifically to you. Duduzile Julie is asking, as women advance in leadership, how influential is their voice in empowering women entrepreneurs in the supply chain, especially in mining? And while you answer that question, maybe if you can also speak to the different interests that women have within the mining sector supply chain.
Absolutely. So, we've been specifically talking about leadership today, but as a CEO within the mining space, my priority was making sure that I had diversity and inclusion across the board. So I would look at, from my supplier space, and in there, Kathy, the initiatives are really around how do we influence more women into the enterprise development space of what we try to do to promote local procurement, but likewise, I think and Rika touched on it earlier. Mining is not about what happens within the mine fence only. Mining is about how we can integrate into the wider ecosystem. So although we're touching on leadership within mine fence today, I think for leadership, and for us to be truly successful, we must look at this across the board in terms of the ecosystem of what we impact, what we influence, and what is the consequence of our actions to make sure that women are represented across that. So the answer very simply is, it's not about diversity or numbers, across the various levels in the organization. It's, even in the company I ran, we had quite a significant mining contractor contingent. I used to put it into the contracts that those mining contractors had to maintain certain levels of gender diversity as well. So it's across the it is across the ecosystem. I think, as I said previously, we all know, not only in South Africa but in general, You empower a woman, you give a woman, financial strength, and she'll make sure to look after the community. So I'm all for making sure that even on the procurement side, that women must be given a disparately larger opportunity than the men until we get this right.
Sure. I've got some more questions, but these are more related to opportunities within Sibanye-Stillwater. So, Rick, I think that you're probably going to be better placed to answer some of them. Charmaine Dimpo is asking, does Sibanye-Stillwater offer opportunities for women industrial psychology students? That's the one question. The other one, also asking about job shadowing opportunities that are available in the organization.
Yes. On both of those questions, of course, yes, indeed. And on the industrial psychology one, we offer supervision too. So there's real place to come and do a type of internship towards the end of your degree. And we have adopted quite a comprehensive industrial psychological, a multicultural assessment framework that's diversified throughout the segment. So there's place and obviously a huge opportunity to deal with these types of things. And then also shadowing and other types of active support and job enrichment strategies to ensure that people are not only developed but kept and want to stay here. And just to Deshni's point, also deliberate strategies for supplier development as well as diversity of criteria in terms of the loans that's being provided to suppliers and supply chain management optimization. Yes, we do. Come and apply.
Go ahead, Deshni.
I just want to add something there. Rika reminded me of something. We've been talking about how do we get more women into senior positions, without necessarily growing the pie. And I suggest, displacing a few men to make way. I think another initiative that corporates must consider to give women a legitimate chair at the table is deputy positions. We don't do enough of those. I think there is such an opportunity to at least take a woman that's maybe, 60% ready, 70% ready, and put her as a deputy into an exco environment that does multiple things, right? Even if she's not successful, but she gets the exposure, something that we are lacking in right now in terms of C-suite. She also gets the opportunity to see, what is actually happening in that environment. I think that the humble point I'm making, if we really care, if we really want to make a difference here, we need to be quite radical in our thoughts and approach. Let this not be a conventional journey. We must think differently. Deputy positions, exco invitees, millennial boards, Gen Z boards are all ways of breaking the norms of this traditional industry.
I wonder, do men also go through the same test, readiness test? And what is the criteria that is applied? Des, you said 70% ready. How do we know when somebody is 60% ready, 70% ready?
I think it comes back to that lean in. It's a self-assessment. Okay. Yeah. You ask someone, and again, I'm going to stereotype because you've given me the platform. I can take liberties. You ask a man if he's ready. He's always 110% ready.
Definitely. All right. So thank you so much for explaining that. And so it really, what it says is that it needs more women to be putting their hands up to say, I'm ready. And you must be the one who determines that and not necessarily let the environment determine that for you. Maybe just a quick check on how we're doing with our poll today. So this is the second poll that we're running. Are women being heard in the mining sector? A very interesting response to this poll, 45% saying yes and 55% saying no. So it's definitely not the majority believe women are being heard. But Vusi, I'm keen to know your interpretation of a poll such as this one. The numbers are quickly changing. Now that I'm mentioning it, people are jumping on and voting yes and no. So your interpretation, it's moving towards the overwhelming no's now.
My quick knee-jerk reaction would be that the conversation is getting better. And I think that's much more realistic and conservative as a response. If you take it by the broad stretch of saying we now here, and the amount of legislation that has gone on in the last 10 years has aggressively highlighted the importance of mainstreaming women. Deshni gave some stats in the beginning. When you looked at the states about 4 years ago, some of the states were saying 15%, 14% in different variations of what the conversation was about. But obviously the conversation is moving, and there's more men that are getting on board and women getting on board to bolster the voice of women in the sector. We can do better.
All right. Thanks for that, Vusi. And again, the numbers are quickly changing. We're now sitting at 35% saying no, and 64% or rather 35% saying yes, women's voices are being heard, and 64% saying no. So I think people just weren't aware that the poll question had changed, and they've quickly come in to cast their votes. Thanks for that. We're nearing the end of our session, and I think it'll be a good time to give our panelists an opportunity maybe just to give some of their closing remarks. And as you do that, though, reflect on what the power of a conversation like this is, and the power of a platform like this is, in terms of being aware of the challenges, but also in terms of uniting and forming some kind of solidarity, especially among women within a sector like the mining sector. Dr. Rika, I'll start with you.
I apologies. You can try and start with me, but I missed the
okay,
question.
Sure. So what I'm doing is I'm giving everybody an opportunity to give their closing remarks. And one of the things that I was asking that you also try and include is speak to the importance or even the significance of a platform such as this, where conversations can be held as a mechanism to building unity and solidarity.
So thank you for that. Apologies for dropping off. I interpreted psychoanalytically for losing voice, but here I'm back. It's extremely important to tackle topics like this as straight head on as possible. Often, I guess a lot of things are just unconscious too, and it's people not even understanding the unintended implications of it. In Africa, I often ask the parents, how would you feel if your daughter is being treated this way? Which then just shifts the dynamic into a total different space because of the huge respect for relations in that way as well. So we have similar activities like this in Sibanye-Stillwater, where actually twice a week as a collective, we engage for 2 hours on conversations that matter. This week, we speak about gender-based violence with our top 1,100 people in that call. Not everybody can call in because of operational dilemmas. Since COVID have started, we had 100 and odd of these 2-hour conversations going twice a week, and people continue attending and participating. And the conversation have shifted to real deep conversations, where initially it was more off the forum. It's now tackled consciously in the forum too. So this for me is the way to go. Stories is the way to go, and to address the way in which we do things, to do things better and more consciously, for me is really extremely important.
Fantastic. Deshni?
Yeah, I think, we've had a fantastic conversation today. I think, simply put, the case for change is very understood, and the time is now. Not only have we seen the numbers, because we are engineers, this is what mining is full of. We are engineers, we understand it. There is a bottom line impact and why diversity makes sense in terms of, the bottom line results. But as I said, there's also a moral imperative here. We've got some of the foundational measures in place. It is time for the leadership in the country at all levels to step up and for once and for all to do the right thing which is in this instance, is to make this industry, which is the backbone of South Africa, right? Mining is a backbone of this country's economy. And we have seen where the country is right now. I do believe that mining has the potential to allow this country to stop regressing and allow it to grow. But for us to make the change that is needed, we have to use the lever of diversity now. I don't want to see women become bigger victims in this pandemic, which is very likely, right? We've also seen the numbers of the fact that women do seem to be more affected out of this pandemic. So we need to arrest that in the first instance. We need to accelerate the inclusion of women to make sure that we can survive through this pandemic. And finally, can we please design mining once and for all to make sure that it is a place that women can feel totally included in. The mining industry, as I mentioned earlier, through Minerals Council, has started looking at this more holistically across the industry. I encourage everyone on this call today to understand what has been put in place and to hold the industry to account a bit more, because I think, and that's what these conversations can do, Kathy. We are in South Africa, we are Africans, we know how to converse. We know how to get conversations going. What we're not good at is the action. So these conversations are excellent in getting different mindsets out there, because I think it's that uniqueness in our differences that we must find a way of working within. That's what the conversation is there for. But please, South Africa, mining as well as the country, can we stop talking and can we please start acting?
A powerful message and a powerful call that is being made there. Thank you so much, Deshni. Vusi?
Thanks, Kathy. A number of things come to mind. I think in the process of the conversation, the words that are buzzing in my mind is transformation, diversity, inclusivity, strength, access for women. Those are the kind of concepts roaming around my head. But I think in the most basic sense for me, one of the things that for me I'm hoping for, which are hopes in a sense, is that I think it would be good to see the industry strengthening the voice of women such that women don't have to shout anymore when they get, in order for their voices to be heard, so that it becomes normal for women to speak and their voices are taken with dignity and respect, and they are not drowned by the masculinity of the industry. That's my first thing. I think we also need to emphasize that there are still barriers that need to be dealt with. Barriers to access, barriers in every other aspect. Earlier, Rika spoke about, as it Deshni, they spoke about PPEs, that PPEs are not created suitably for women. There's many other variances of issues that need to change in terms of the general physical space for women to access the space more. And then I guess also just to say, to celebrate the strengths and the strides. Deshni hasn't said some of the things that she's personally doing with the mining sector in terms of legislature, in terms of changing the narrative and making some of these conversations to matter. We need to make the conversation about the place of women in business and in leadership and in mining a key conversation for our transformation as a country, and more than anything else. And lastly, I thank you for allowing me as a man to be part of a conversation like this. I feel honored.
Before you say your goodbyes, Vusi, I want us to just take a look at what people are saying on social media under the hashtag SS Women in Mining or hashtag Sibanye-Stillwater. Goddess says, Thank you, Sibanye-Stillwater, for opening the mining space for women too. Powerful, candid conversation. Unalem Nade quoting Ms. Deshni Naidu, the cause for change is very much understood and the time is now. She says we are surely heading to the light there. Somebody else says to make a difference, we need to be radical in the way that we address women empowerment. And Goddess says, with so much going on in our country in terms of gender inequality, I applaud Sibanye-Stillwater for enforcing gender diversity and creating opportunities for all women in this sector too. And maybe just some of the comments that people have been posting on the chat group. Bongi Moyo Bango says, an important comment about being bold enough to raise your hand and take up all the opportunities that are being offered. And of course, just an announcement from Mail and Guardian, who are partners with Sibanye-Stillwater on this event. A recording of this event will be sent to all of the attendees after the webinar. So you can keep a lookout to your mail. I know there've been some important themes that have come up, and it's really great to be able to go and listen back to what has been said. With that said, let me thank all of you for your time this afternoon and for being part of this conversation. It's been a pleasure being in conversation with you, and I certainly hope that all of the delegates and participants who have been listening and tuned into this conversation have benefited from the learnings that you have shared. A happy Women's Month to the women on the panel and all that are also part. I know that in our country, there often seems to be very little to celebrate when you're a woman. Deshni was right. The latest figures do show us that it is in fact Black women who have been worst affected by COVID-19. They're the ones who've lost their livelihoods. They're the ones who have been unable to go around and create a living. So let's keep that in mind, and wherever we can, see the pockets to create, maybe to make life a bit better. Reach out that helping hand to those in the community, to those in the society, because certainly now is the time for us to be a little bit kinder to each other and to spread a lot more love than perhaps we would ordinarily do. So I certainly wish you all a successful August month as we commemorate the struggles of the women of this country, but also I think celebrate the iconic women that have played such a crucial role in getting us to where we are today. On that note, I am officially going to be switching off the button for this conversation. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.